everyone, and welcome to our bi weekly episode of Things That Matter. The topic that we will be discussing today is very important and much needed given everything that is happening to our climate and our environment. If you've guessed it, you're right. We will be talking about climate change and climate justice. Just a quick note about our show. We will be broadcasting 2 episodes every month on various topics that cover religion and politics. Our first episode in our series will usually be our expert panel, where speakers who are subject matter experts will introduce the topic and share their points of view with our audience. Our second episode, which will be recorded on the fourth Wednesday, will be a conversation with our board members where we will share our reflections on the conversation we have participated and brought to you. Uh, progressivechristianity.org hopes that these conversations inspire, impact, and bring much needed insight on topics that are important and matter to us as people of faith who strive for peace and justice towards all people. So, without further notice, I would like to introduce our wonderful, wonderful panel. I am so excited to introduce Reverend Dr. Matthew Fox and Reverend Dr. Thomas Hermans Webster. Just a quick introduction and a bio. Matthew Fox is a spiritual theologian, an Episcopal priest, and an activist for gender justice and equal justice. As a spiritual theologian, he has written 39 books that have been translated into over 60 languages. Um, Among them are The Original Blessing, The Coming of the Cosmic Christ, A Spirituality Named Compassion, and so many more. Um, Reverend Dr. Fox holds a doctorate in history and theology of spirituality from the Institut Catholique de Paris, the founder of the University of Creation Spirituality in California. He also conducts dozens of workshops each year and is a visiting scholar at the Academy for the Love of Learning. Uh, if you're interested in responding passionately about the news of climate change, you can also find him on Daily Meditations with MatthewFox.org. Our next panelist is a friend and is a brilliant scholar, Reverend Dr. Thomas Hermans Webster. He is the son of Alabama Methodists, whose experience of Christianity has led him to ordination and ministry in theological education. He earned his PhD from Boston University School of Theology, where he developed a process theology of Holy Communion in a sacramental eco-theology from Norman Pittenger, Theodore Walker, Theodore Walker Jr., Monica Coleman, Karen Baker Fletcher, Mary Elizabeth Moore, and others. Currently, he serves as the acquiring editor at Orbis Books in Maryknoll, New York. And this October, his chapter, and this is interesting because I've heard him present on this, the dystopic relations of interstellar, a response from Christian eco-theology, will be published in the book Theology, Religion, and Dystopia, a volume of the Theology, Religion, and Pop Culture series at Fortress Academy. For a fuller and a more detailed bio of our speakers, you can find their links on our website. But let's get started. So, welcome to you both. And before we begin our conversation, I will invite each of you to take about 5 to 8 minutes and just set the stage for us and make brief introductory comments on the topic of climate change, which is very important and is affecting and impacting all of us. So we'll start with Dr. Fox. If you could speak to us, and we are having a little bit of a technical issue, so you will hear Dr. Fox, but we unfortunately cannot see him because there's some issue with the camera. So thank you for your patience.
Well, thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Tom. I'm looking forward to our conversation. And obviously, I especially love the question you're posing, which is, of course, that of our very survival, not just our species, which is facing extinction in the facing the reality of climate change, but also millions of um, other creatures on this amazing and special planet. So it's such an important question. Just in yesterday's news, I saw on the internet a headline that uh, heat shattered 7,000 records this year alone in the United States alone. 7,000 records, and they had dots on a map that showed that it was in the northeast and the southeast, in the south, and surely now in the far west. So it's amazing that we have a whole political party in America that doesn't want to talk about climate change and doesn't vote to address climate change. It's just amazing that the human race is capable of hiding its head in the sand for so long and so deeply, and of course, to selling its soul to extractive capitalist fossil fuel barons. It's a scandal. It also shows it's another part of our challenge today is that, of course, of our politics around the world. So, and that's directly related to the question at hand. Now, how to address what's really behind the uh, climate change crisis? I had a dream over 20 years ago that said very simply and directly, there's nothing wrong with the human species today except one thing. You have forgotten the sense of the sacred. We have forgotten the sense of the sacred. That is what is behind the crisis of ecology and climate change today. That our religion has gotten so centered on the human,
Mhm.
and so has the rest of our culture. It's all been so anthropocentric, it's so human centered. What's in it for us? That we've gone out and raped Mother Earth willy nilly for centuries, still going on. Take a good look at the rainforest in the Amazon right now. And, um, and this is the cause of climate change. So religion is very much a part of the problem to the extent we have set ourselves up to be a religion exclusively of staying out of hell and being redeemed instead of the first article of faith, which is the sacredness of creation. For example, I swear 98% of preachers have had the first page of their Bible ripped away by somebody because the first page of the Bible does not say anything about sin or evil. It's a cosmology, it's a story of creation, and behind every creature mentioned, this is good, this is good, this is good. And that word could be translated beautiful as well. This is beautiful, this is beautiful, this is good. And then at the end, human board, which is today's creation story too, from science, we're at the end, arrived, and then it's all very good. So why don't we begin that way? Because if you don't begin with the goodness of creation, you're not going to be empowered to do something about the evil that we are involved in. Now, Thomas Berry, the great geologian, um, had this to say about this very topic. He said that an absence of a sense of the sacred is a basic flaw in many of our efforts at ecologically, environmentally adjusting our human presence to the natural world. It has been said, we will not save what we do not love. It is also true that we will neither love nor save what we do not experience as sacred. And he says, eventually, only our sense of the sacred will save us. Now, how do we recover a sense of the sacred? Well, Thomas Berry thinks we recover a sense of the sacred with a sense of awe and wonder at the universe itself. We have to step out of our own human narcissism, as Pope Francis rightly calls it in his brilliant encyclical on the environment, step out of our narcissism as a species and begin where religion begins, including Genesis 1 and John 1 when you move to the Christian Bible. And now the Christian archetype for the sacredness of creation is the cosmic Christ. Now we've been running on a Nicene Creed, which is a 4th century document created in the presence of the emperor and at his behest. And it contains a lot of Greek philosophy, and that's fine. It was happening in Greece, and that was the 4th century, fine. But today we have to step beyond the 4th
Right.
century Nicene Creed and begin at the beginning, which is the cosmic Christ, because the first teaching explicit on the cosmic Christ in the Christian Bible is from Paul, the earliest writer. So this would be the earliest creed to say
Yeah.
that we believe in the Christ who connects everything together in the heavens and the earth. This is how you recover the sacred. You work with science, and of course now we have Webb telescope bringing to our living rooms and our internets the brilliance of the first galaxies and the first stars. I mean, that itself is a miracle. And so the sacred is all around us. And of course, great poets like Mary Oliver and others know this, and great mystics like Hildegard of Bingen knew this. And we lost this because we went into this mode. And Thomas Berry says it happened with the Black Death, the pandemic of the 15th century, that we lost creation spirituality. And when we lost creation spirituality, because the pandemic was so fierce and people were afraid there was no science to deal with it, we've been running on that fear of death and fear of hell since the late 15th century, with just a few exceptions. And but before that, with great souls like Hildegard and Aquinas and Francis and Eckhart and Julian Norwich, we began with the universe, not with ourselves. The Middle Ages does not begin with the human, it begins with the universe. And it is part of modern consciousness to begin with the human. I think, therefore I am, says Descartes. Nothing could be more foolish. Descartes is and I am because there have been 13.8 billion years of work on the part of the universe and God to bring us forward and to bring this earth forward and to have it so beautiful and fitting for our very precious but fragile species. So uh, Bruce Chilton, one of the great New Testament scholars of our time, says that Paul believed not just in a cosmic Christ, but a metacosmic Christ, a metacosmic Christ. That no one, he says, believed in a bigger Christ than Paul. And again, Paul is the first writer in our Bible. And then Nick Quasson, another John Dominic Quasson, another good, great New Testament scholar of our time, says that for Paul, you can't be a Christian without being a mystic. Well, this
Yes.
too then brings in that archetype of the cosmic Christ. This, because Christ is a light in all beings, as John 1 says, and holds everything together in the heavens and the earth, as Colossians 1 says. And so being the light in all beings, that rings bells today, because scientists are telling us there are photons or light waves in every atom in the universe. So, hey, today's science is matching up with the powerful metaphor and archetype of the cosmic Christ. In terms of deep ecumenism, the Buddhists talk about the Buddha nature and everything. So we can talk about the Christ nature and everything. And the Jewish tradition talks about Tselem, that is the image of God in every being in the universe. So, hey, we've got a whole new renaissance for religion right here because of the crisis that we're in. So it's time to shake off some of our previous Christologies that were based on running an empire. That's what Constantine the 4th century was all about. The church inherited the empire that century, and go back to our sources. And our sources are about the cosmic Christ, which is about the sacredness of all being, the sacredness, therefore, of all relationships. Just as the Lakota people pray, Ahom Mitakuye, all our relations are sacred. Amen.
Wow. Thank you, Matthew. I think that's a great way to begin the conversation and setting the stage. I'll just invite uh, Reverend Dr. Thomas Hermans Webster. Tom, your comments, and how can you pick up this conversation and push it forward?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Matthew, thank you for your comments. Truly, it's wild to get to follow you. theologically, I'm convinced that we have to critically engage questions of climate change and climate justice because God cares. And for people who do theology in a Christian tradition, we're folks who claim to be thinking about, reflecting on, and self-critically reflecting on God and ultimate reality. And when we come to realize that God cares about the world that God is deeply in love with, then when we do our theology, we have to do our theology with attention to what God cares about. And in the work that I've been doing, I think one of the things that keeps coming up is the realization that it's not just that God cares and wants the best for us. That certainly is the case. Working for good in all things, to quote that first cosmic Christologist with Paul. But I think it's also that God not just wants the good for us, but God needs us to become good relatives with each other on this planet for planetary health. God desperately needs us to experience beauty and peace and love in concert with each other. And that each other is not just a human other, but all of our creaturely kin. One of the things that I think we in the Western Christian tradition, particularly in the Protestant tradition, as a Wesleyan Methodist, I come down out of the Anglican tradition, but a lot of U.S. American Protestant Christianity emerges out of this Reformed pattern of anxiety toward our place in the world, and work then is done in the world as a way to kind of address this anxiety of, will I experience election or not? And even in the Wesleyan traditions and the Anglican traditions, we have some of this anxiety too of thinking about spiritual experience and thinking about and experiencing the love of God for me, even me, a sinner, that we still focus on that individual and the individual experience of assurance, or the individual growth into holiness. And I think one of the things that we've got to do desperately is rethink our theologies of salvation away from individuality and towards sociality. The good Wesleyans who are paying attention to this and watching this video are probably, got a bunch of flags up right now that they're saying, but wait, John Wesley said there's no holiness but social holiness. And certainly, and he's right, but I think we need to recapture that as something more than just fighting for social justice. But rather we need to recapture that as a statement about who we are as relatives in the planet. It's not, no holiness but social holiness is not some like huge call to arms for radical solidarity that brings about a political agenda. No holiness but social holiness is a statement of fact that we cannot experience the beatific vision, we cannot experience theosis or holiness without one another. And certainly that means living into the prayer that Christ taught, to live on earth as it is in heaven. But we have to begin with the knowledge and the concern that we're only doing that because we're intimately woven into each other's lives. So that's the thing I would add to everything that's already been said. I think theologically we have to care about this because it's what God cares about. And we have to readjust our thinking out of an individuality and towards a recognition that we're doing this because we're implicated in one another's lives. And we're not going to experience beauty and goodness if we try to do it all on our own.
Matthew, do you? I want to open it up. Do you want to respond to that, or?
Well, sure. I appreciate what Tom was saying, and I had not known that line from Wesley, which I like, no holiness but social holiness. But we can extend it, I think, to say no holiness but creation holiness or cosmic holiness. That the whole universe is holy because, as is implied in your first sentence, God made it, and all of it is beloved of God, and that includes us. Again, when you talk, Tom, about that getting off the anxiety that is created by the fear of damnation and so forth. Now, the whole sin ideology, which is a 4th century statement. Jesus never heard of original sin. You can't say that often enough. Jesus never heard of original sin. Jesus never heard of original sin. He's a Jew, and Jews do not believe in original sin. And they wrote the book of Genesis. So, and the Garden of Eden story is not about original sin. It's about falling. Yeah, it's about human stupidity and folly. Yes, and our capacity for sin, even evil, which is bigger than sin. But that's not the primary message from Jesus. Or the primary, again, let's go back to Genesis 1, that we're here not to avoid hell. Now, Christopher Stendhal, the great biblical scholar who was Lutheran, and Luther was also very heavily weighted down by the issue of sin and salvation. But Christopher Stendhal breaks out of it, and he says the whole idea of individual salvation is not in the Bible. It's not in the Bible, and it's true. Jews do not talk about individual salvation. That's why they have trouble talking about heaven, because the images we've had of heaven are about getting there as individuals. But the Jewish word is tikkun, to repair the whole world. That's why we're here. And I was glad that Tom used that line from Eastern theology of theosis, to divinize the whole world. So that's Eastern Christianity, because Eastern Christianity did not follow Augustine. In fact, an Orthodox theologian once said to me, "We can't believe that your church canonized Augustine. We think he's just off the wall." And they don't begin with original sin. And Buddhism doesn't have original sin. And Islam doesn't have original sin. And Judaism doesn't have original sin. So it's only 4th century on some Christians who have original sin. I find that even Thomas Aquinas, doctor and saint of the church, talks about original goodness and the pristine goodness. And of course, I wrote a book and a whole thesis on original blessing, which is the theological word for goodness. We have to begin there. And in doing that, you build up people's ego and people's appreciation of their right to be here. Jesus said, "Love others as you love yourself." Well, how can you love yourself if you think you're destined for hell unless you get some kind of miraculous intervention along the way? So I just think the whole ideology of original sin has permeated Western religion since Augustine, and it's even permeated our politics, because I think that consumer capitalism is a secular version of original sin. That you're not pretty enough, your teeth aren't white enough, your car isn't blue enough, and so you got to find external salvation, make enough money to prove you're saved, and you can drive a Buick that shines. And all that is, it tears us down. It's so pessimistic, and it feeds patriarchy, because, as Adrian Rich says, patriarchy always includes fatalistic self-hatred. So original sin feeds fatalistic self-hatred. Therefore, it's feeding patriarchy, and vice versa. And that's why we need climate crisis.
Yeah, Tom?
We hate ourselves.
I want to lift up one word that you said that I think is so important, and it was intervention. one of you said, the only response then can be a miraculous intervention. That word intervention, I think, is such a critical word for Western Christians who have no clue how important that entire framework is in how we understand the world, not just in how we understand our relationship with God. And what I mean by that is in the rise of modernity and in the rise of industrialism, we begin to put on in Western European and US American white industrialist worldviews, we begin to put this mechanized system onto the world, right? We begin to see planet Earth as a machine.
Mhm.
And when we begin to see our whole existence as a machine, then the only possible ways that something that's not regular in our life, the salvation of God, for people who feel very dragged down by this original sin ideology, that can only come in as an intervention into the machine, because it's a constant broken machine. And so I want to lift up you saying that word intervention, because I think thinking about God as only engaging us and us engaging God only at these moments of intervention is a huge just bottom line assumption that a lot of theologies have that get in the way of what you say as getting back to the sense of the sacred,
Mhm.
right? That part of, I think, and this comes out in Paul, and it certainly comes out in parables of Jesus, talking about like vines and branches.
Mhm.
But thinking about the world in a more organic way and a more organismic way, the world as organism, not just the planet as organism, but the world, the whole cosmos as organism, really challenges this mechanical thinking where our relationship with God can only be this intervention that radically alters the world in this one moment with me and God, and then other things may or may not change around me. Instead, I think one of the things that's so important in recovering a sense of the sacred is it really rocks not just our relationships with God and one another in religious settings, it also rocks the very assumption that there's a gap between religious settings and non-religious settings. And that can really open up, I think, this opportunity, like you mentioned, I think it can really open up this opportunity to be empowered to be in relationship with our relatives with hooves and wings and scales and gills, in ways that are life-giving for all of us. And so it's a small word that I think doesn't get talked about a ton. But thank you for saying intervention. One of the things that it reminds me of a lot is the challenge that we're offered in ecclesiology that's really, really biblically based, right? Body ecclesiology. That we're the body of Christ. We're not a body over here with Christ over here. There's a union and a weaving together. There's not this like radical lightning bolt from the heavens intervention. Rather, we're baptized into a living, breathing organism. And that's an opportunity for, I think, how we can love and fall in love again with our planet.
You know, the just your point, Tom, of, when you talk about the body of Christ, I think there's even in the way we have interpreted that metaphor is also, so problematic. Like we think of body and we just leave it there, not think of the body as growing, maturing, needing nourishment, needing care, right? And that also feeds into what Matthew was talking about, the the ego, the anthropocentric way in which we even have come to talk about the human body as somehow being above creation and not as part of creation. And just picking up on this and just pushing the conversation in a little bit different way. Because when we talk about climate change, there seems to be a sense of, like, where do we even begin? How do you even begin to have this conversation? What are some of the ways to begin to address this in our own communities? And we've all seen the evidences of it. Matthew just pointed to the heat waves. In India, just last week, there were floods. People couldn't even walk in my own hometown, Bangalore, because people had been building on, filling up water bodies and building on them, and that has caused so much devastation. So how do you even begin to have this conversation and maybe create like a conversation about climate change that is born out of love? What would that look like? Because we talked about caring and we talked about the sense of sacred. Either of you.
Well, I think one approach to bring back the sacred that I've been involved in is ritual. And so we've been creating what we call the cosmic mass, which is a mass. It's a Eucharistic celebration, but it's done using postmodern art forms like DJ and VJ and dance and rap and rave. We borrowed it from the rave movement, actually. But it's been extremely effective in waking people up and bringing the joy back. But also, we follow the four paths of Christian spirituality. So the first dance, and we pick a theme that's different for each mass. For example, we've had themes like the return of the divine feminine, or the sacredness of trees, or the Black diaspora, or Celtic spirituality. But you pick one, and then you have images to dance in the presence of. So, for example, if we're honoring the trees, the sacredness of trees, then of course you'd have tree images. And you dance the via positiva. You dance before them with music that's very uplifting and so forth. But we always go into the via negativa also, that is, into grieving. And this is so important. We have to do grieving work today. And I think religions, not just Christianity, they're all failing at this. So what we devise is a practice where you get down on all fours, which really is all sixes, because it's your feet touches the ground, your knees and your hands. And then you create a seventh and get your head down on the floor. And then you let the sound from your third chakra, from your gut, come forward. That's where we carry our grief. And of course, it begins with anger. The first level of grief is anger. Then you go deeper, and then it's sorrow. And then deeper still is letting go. But we do that as a group. And there have been astounding experiences people have had, and all kinds of experiences, including atheists who have come to our masses. And so I'm just convinced we have to do the two things. We have to take the joy and the beauty in creation, the via positiva, but then we have to have deep practices for the grieving. Then you come to the path 3, the via creativa, is the communion, of course, the sharing of bread and wine. And all that implies the eating and drinking of the cosmic Christ again. And Thich Nhat Hanh, who's not a Christian but understands Christianity well, has I think written the best about the Eucharist. When he talks about, he says, what better thing could Jesus have left behind than to eat the body and drink the wine? Because he said, a piece of bread, there's sunshine in the bread, there's rain in the bread, there are clouds in the bread, the whole universe is in the bread, right? You're eating the cosmic Christ. So, and then the last part of the Mass is via transformativa, where you gear up the energy to go out and make a difference, to interfere like prophets do. So to develop that spiritual warriorhood and courage that it's going to take. And for that, then we have another dance, which is a more a more grounding dance, and one that brings in the warriorhood that all of us are called to today, to stand up on behalf of Mother Earth. So that's just an example, I think, of how a ritual can be rewoven today with today's languages. And I compare it to the 12th century when the stained glass came in such a stunning way with the Gothic revolution of architecture. And the stained glass was so amazing, and it dances as the sun moves and all the rest. So I think today's electronic inventions like DJ and fractal. So one mass we did on Hildegard of Bingen, we took her paintings, and this young woman turned them into fractals. So we danced to Hildegard of the 12th century to 21st century fractals of her painting. And I found that utterly thrilling. So that's one thing we have to do, is to gin up the energy of the community and the imagination, so that we can move into our various roles in life, whether we're lawyers or doctors or craftspeople or farmers. Everybody has to get on board for climate change and for this ecological revolution. And as parents and grandparents, and of course teachers, oh my goodness, and even politicians. And so all of us have to get on board, and that's what ritual is meant to do. It's meant to be a work of the people, all the people together, learning the sacred dimension to carrying on the work of climate change that you've asked about and talked about. And then we take it into our various work worlds.
Right. And just in the way you were describing it, Matthew, with the worship service, it really brings out this idea to have this conversation out of joy, as opposed to just only anxiety and just a quick response to fix.
Exactly. Or guilt or duty. No, that won't do it. We have to
That
step into the arena of the spiritual, which always begins, as Rabbi Hassan says, awe is the beginning of wonder. And
right.
I loved what Tom said about the word intervention. If I could just add one word to that conversation. Another word for intervention is miracle. So the question becomes, how are we defining miracles? Well, I don't define miracles, but Tom's right. In a mechanical universe, there are no miracles. You have to have this intervention, a wild Shazam thing happen. But in the real world, in creation itself, everything's miraculous. And Einstein himself said that there are two ways to live in life: as if nothing is a miracle, which is mechanism and materialism, or as if everything is. And the truth is, when you get to know the new creation from science, 13.8 billion years that we've come here, it's all a miracle, really, that this earth has happened, and that we've emerged out of it even, and that we've got a little bit of intelligence, that we can look back on those billions of years and take pictures of it and bring it home and all that. I mean, there are so many miracles. I always recommend to people, go back to Walt Whitman's poem called Miracles. He gets it. That's good theology, what he says there, that everything is a miracle. Making love is a miracle. Making babies is a miracle. Raising babies is a miracle. Blah, blah, blah. So I really like that, Tom, that you picked up on that word, because I think you're right. That is a pinpoint, if you will, or we have to shake that up, that idea. And of course, the point is, creation is a miracle. And either we believe it's sacred and miraculous, and miracle means what is marvelous. That's how Einstein defines miracle: the marvelous, not intervention as such, but the marvelous. And the truth is, our existence is marvelous.
Mm-hmm.
It's a miracle.
Tom?
Yeah, I agree. It is marvelous indeed. I want to thank you for talking about ritual and turning to Eucharist and putting it in the context of religious ritual. Sharon's got a smile from ear to ear because I think she knows what's coming. So I think two places to start, in addition to everything that has already been said, I think two places to start are not just in the ritual the ritual sacred meal of the Eucharist, but the ritual of every meal that we eat. One of the things that paying attention to our meals, not in some kind of like food journal disordered eating, anxiety producing way, but paying attention out of the baseline assumption that we are related to all of the creatures we eat. We're related to the lettuce. We're related to the spinach. We're related to the chicken and to the fish and to the bees who give us the honey. When we begin in paying attention to who comes to the table, who's coming to dinner, to quote the title of a book by an old Methodist bishop, who's coming to dinner, we begin to realize that it's not just who are the other humans sitting around the immediate table. It's who are all of the humans who have contributed to this meal. Who are the farm workers, and how can I live my life so that they have a better life? Who are all of the grocery store clerks or farmers market workers or packers at the food prep delivery warehouse? How can I eat this meal? How can I live my life such that they live a better life? When we begin to think about that, we then also don't get the willies by looking at our meals and seeing other creatures. That's not then an ethical conundrum that should drive us all into deep sadness, but rather it's an opportunity for the depth of humility that someone else gave of themselves so that you might live, so that I might live. And then we have this opportunity to come into the world in awe and in gratitude. We have then the opportunity to come to the Eucharisteo, right? To the I give thanks meal in a ritual that is grounded in this sense of cosmic connection. But here's the key, and this is what I think is even more important than this wondrous cosmic sense. And I say this as someone who grew up in the shadow of the Saturn V rocket in Huntsville, Alabama, like down the street from NASA, right? Like we love space in North Alabama. But when you begin to ask who's coming to dinner, you begin to look at the ground under your feet and pay attention to your planetary location as part of this beautiful, marvelous cosmos. And when we can do that, then one of the things I think that does is mobilize us to learn more about how we got where we are, who we're in relationship with now, and where we could go with them in the future, and what it takes to go there. It takes it out of like big policy discussions off in Washington or big, multinational agreements in Paris, and it puts it into neighborhoods and into households and into communities of backyards and gardens. And I think that gives us the opportunity to begin in really locally meaningful ways.
Right.
And I know we're getting pretty quick on time, but I think one of the things when we begin in these really locally meaningful ways, it takes some of the pressure off of having to be the superhero alone who changes the world. And we begin to recognize the truth of growing into beauty and love because we're doing it together. Instead of putting your head on the pillow at night, all you can think about is that you fail at your individual rising above. Instead, you have the opportunity to put your head on the pillow, knowing that whether your day was as marvelous and awe-inspiring as you wanted it to be or not, that there are people who care for you and who are with you in this. And that gives us reason then in the morning to put the shoes back on and get back to work.
Right. No, thank you so much. I think yeah, we're getting close to time, and I usually always end up going over time, but that's just me. Um, I just think the conversation we've had today is so needed, not just because it's an important topic, but just because of the way both of you approached it. I see many comments, because we do have live comment section. I see many comments, and it's very reflective of the ways we talk about climate change. Climate change is scary. It makes me worried. It gives me anxiety. It makes me feel guilty. And y'all just shifted the conversation to talk about it in a way that through ritual, through think about it in terms of Eucharist. I've heard you talk about this before, Tom, but and I always say, the way you all talk about the Eucharist, the way you talk about Eucharist makes me think of every time I go up to take communion. It changes the way I think about the bread and the wine now, right? These are little practices, but talk about things, as Matthew said, with joy. I mean, think about joy, be connected, be in community. That's all, unfortunately, we have time for. I think we need a part two. I definitely think we need a part two of this. Thank you so much, Matthew and Tom. And please find their bios, their websites on our website on progressivechristianity.org. And I guess we cannot wait to have a response to this conversation and further it even more when we get together as board members on the fourth Wednesday. Thank you again. This is progressivechristianity.org, and it was just such a wonderful conversation. Take care.
Thank you.